Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about how I shall personally give each and every person watching this video £1 million. You know I'm going to do it. I wrote it on the side of a bus. If you don't believe it after seeing it presented in such a clever and relatable way, you're just not British enough. How about if I tell it to you like this? A large northern Slavic country has categorically not interfered in the outcome of me giving you £1 million each. I know this for a fact, despite never having bothered to investigate whether or not they interfered in my huge cash giveaway, even though I've proof of them attempting to interfere with other previous giveaways, as well as having come into my home and murdered my dog. Still sceptical? Try this one. You've all worked incredibly hard during the COVID-19 pandemic, and as a result, I'd like to give each of you £1 million. Other presenters have given their viewers far more, but I don't think you've been paying attention to that, so I think you'll be grateful for the £1 million and not notice that it's far less than I could have given you if I actually give it to you at all. Not keen? Some of you perhaps realising that I have no intention whatsoever of depositing a large chunk of money into your account? Some of the rest of you thinking that perhaps the terms I've retrospectively tagged onto this fabulous financial fiesta are potentially just the tiniest bit totally and utterly rubbish? A few others amongst you may be thinking it would be nice if the giveaway I implied at the start of this section was just a tiny bit better regulated. Maybe all of you are feeling cheated, perhaps directly lied to. Congratulations. Welcome to the world of post-truth political statements, where reality doesn't matter and no one's going to ask questions about what gets said anyway. This week has highlighted yet more of the prolonged campaign of utterly out of control alternative facts that depressingly have become de rigueur in politics in the UK over recent years. The many topics that presented themselves for this week's show, even by Wednesday, could all individually have captured the full body of the report, but there was just too great a choice to pick a single item. I'm almost grateful, therefore, that they have such a horrifying, unifying origin. It allows me to switch to a more shotgun spread style of potshot rather than the high-powered rifle approach of the last few weeks, and it also allows me to highlight that not a single thing will be done to make up for this body of lies. There is actually no legislation whatsoever in the UK that holds political representatives accountable for failing to speak the truth to the public. Also, that Boris Johnson thinks that an acceptable punishment for those who do lie to the people is just to crawl through Parliament on their hands and knees. Maybe this is a horrific fetish of his that we're now going to be forced to witness at question time. Who knows? I'm not on board with that. I don't know about you. Let's start with the item that has undoubtedly delayed until exactly this week so that the far-reaching implications of it could be buried by the rest of the news. Russian interference in the UK democratic process. The timing of this release is absolutely no coincidence. It has been done at the point where the fallout could be minimised, and the scope of what it really means quickly forgotten. Just in time, in fact, for MPs to start their summer vacations. Don't worry though, they've earned this holiday. It's not as though there is an international medical crisis or a dramatic change in the political platform of the nation looming on the horizon that might require them to continue focusing on their jobs. Sun, sex, sangria, that is all that matters to them now. The most horrifying Club Med holiday you have ever seen. For the love of God, do not picture Michael Fallon in nothing but a pair of Speedos chatting up some poor, unsuspecting young woman at a bar in Ibiza. That shit will haunt your waking nightmares for days. Trust me on this. No, don't do it. No. Now that you've definitely stopped picturing that, 100%, and just in case the government succeeded in doing exactly what they set out to do, or perhaps if by some weird quirk of fate I've become your only source of news, let me just explain all of this. On Tuesday, the 21st of July, the 42-page initial summary from the Intelligence and Security Committee regarding Russian interference in the Brexit referendum was finally made available to the public, albeit in a heavily redacted format. You probably do remember the document I'm referring to, the one that was completed last year in time for the general election of 2019, that was signed off by the intelligence services as being fit for release before the general election of 2019, and that Prime Minister Johnson then deemed not necessary for the public to be informed about the details of before the general election of 2019. The document that the restriction of caused public outcry over, as we all wondered what we weren't being told. The document that the government responded to by saying, "We have seen no evidence of successful interference in the EU referendum," as though them saying it somehow made everything better. Well, now we know why they weren't exactly falling over themselves to get it into the public eye. It turns out that it is way more damaging than anything we could have possibly previously thought. Not because it does point directly to Russian interference in our elections and referenda, but because of the reason that it doesn't. Here's MP Stuart Hosey to explain.
The committee found it astonishing that no one in government had sought beforehand to protect the referendum from such attempts or investigated afterwards what attempts to influence it there may have been. The government, the UK government, should have recognised the threat back in 2014 in relation to the Scottish referendum, but it didn't. It didn't understand the threat until after the hack and leak operation against the Democratic National Committee in the United States. And because it was too slow to recognise the threat, it didn't take action to protect the UK in 2016. One would have thought that once the existence of that threat had been understood, seeing what had happened in the US, that someone here would have wanted to understand the extent and nature of the threat to the UK, and we wanted to see the post-referendum assessment. But there isn't one. There has been no assessment of Russian interference in the EU referendum, and this goes back to nobody wanting to touch this issue with a 10-foot pole. This is in stark contrast to the US response to reports of interference in the 2016 presidential elections. No matter how politically awkward or potentially embarrassing, there should have been an assessment of Russian interference in the EU referendum, and there must now be one. And the public must be told the results of that assessment.
So that's good then. Boris isn't a liar. There really is categorically no evidence of successful interference by Russia in the EU referendum, nor in any other part of the democratic process of the British Isles. Why would there be if no one asked the fucking question? For reference, this is the exact same logic that allows me to know for utter and complete certainty that no one in my group of friends has ever enticed a dog to fellate them by covering their genitals in peanut butter. It's entirely possible. I've just deliberately never asked the question. That said, and because I've started with this horrific metaphor, I'm going to see it to the end, I might consider asking the question if, for further example, any time I went round to visit one of them, there was a half-empty jar of Woof, the peanut butter for dogs, and a traumatised looking Labrador. If the evidence suggests it's happening, surely there is an obligation to at least query what the hell is going on. And in this instance, condiment-induced bestial fellatio aside, there was definitely evidence. For a start, there is open source confirmation of Russian interference as far back as the Scottish independence referendum. In fact, the committee stated that they believed the referendum to be the first post-Soviet interference in a Western democratic election. That should have started some alarm bells ringing straight away. The fact that Russia, under the leadership of a former KGB senior spy in Vladimir Putin, took aim at the Scottish Indie referendum as the starting point for branching out into influencing Western affairs is a big deal. His desire to separate the English from haggis and deep-fried Mars bars is matched, it seems, only by our own, although one suspects his reasons might not include the prevention of heart disease. Regardless of their spy master-in-chief's reasons, it seems as though, according to the report published Tuesday, Russia was not taken by the UK to be a serious threat in these matters until the hack and leak operation made against the Democratic Party in the run-up to the 2016 US elections. Now, keep in mind before we go on, that scandal happened after the EU referendum. The most important distinction with the US hack is that it immediately led to a truly huge public inquiry, which cost the US government in excess of $32 million. The 2-year investigation was led by former head of the FBI and man most likely to play Marley's ghost in a White House rendition of A Christmas Carol, Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller. That investigation returned the following finding, in Mr. Mueller's own words.
As you know, I made a few limited remarks about our report when we closed the special counsel's office in May of this year. But there are certain points that bear emphasis. First, our investigation found that the Russian government interfered in our election in sweeping and systematic fashion. Second, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired with the Russian government in its election interference activities. We did not address collusion, which is not a legal term. Rather, we focused on whether the evidence was sufficient to charge any member of the campaign with taking part in a criminal conspiracy, and it was not. Third, our investigation of efforts to obstruct the investigation and lie to investigators was of critical importance. Obstruction of justice strikes at the core of the government's effort to find the truth and to hold wrongdoers accountable. Finally, as described in Volume 2 of our report, we investigated a series of actions by the President towards the investigation. Based on Justice Department policy and principles of fairness, we decided we would not make a determination as to whether the President committed a crime. That was our decision then, and it remains our decision today.
That's not entirely open to interpretation, is it? Nor is the following statement by Mueller regarding the investigation's finding into whether the Trump campaign was involved. If we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the President clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. Based on the facts and the applicable legal standards, however, we are unable to reach that judgment. This then is literally the opposite of the problem we've had in the UK this week. The Mueller inquiry was asked the direct question, was the President guilty? And the answer was apparently, yeah, probably, maybe, I can't say for sure, but he certainly wasn't innocent. Look, would you accept a shade of grey, perhaps, on this black and white matter? President Trump, in his trademark way, had an alternative interpretation because, of course, he did.
There was no collusion with Russia, the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. There was no collusion with Russia. There was no obstruction, and none whatsoever. And it was a complete and total exoneration.
That is a man whose relationship with the truth could best be described as distant. And yet, crucially, his opinion does not matter in this regard. He can continue to mug the facts at gunpoint for all the parts he needs to fuel his addiction as much as he wants, like the filthy adoration junkie that he is. It makes no difference. The United States intelligence services did their due diligence, and as such they are better prepared to protect their country going forward from these kinds of threats. It didn't matter to the FBI whether it interfered with the political landscape. They needed the answer as a matter of national importance, and a bipartisan investigation found those answers. Not so in the UK. There is simply no post-referendum assessment by the intelligence services as to whether Russia involved themselves in our referendum. Our senior intelligence officials decided that it was too political for them to get involved. Despite the obvious and documented use of Russian state-sanctioned bots and trolls during the referendum campaign, no further investigation was ever carried out. Now, that is a problem in and of itself, because as the ISC state in their report, this basically means that no one was protecting the country from foreign interference in our democratic process. But it's seriously concerning when the government refused to request an investigation of interference simply because they like the deniability of not knowing whether it's gone one way or the other for sure. It's like an ostrich sticking its head in the sand, but rather than for danger, doing it instead because it receives an earth-shattering orgasm every time. I think we can all understand the joy of such wondrous quick release for such little effort, but I'm fairly sure we can all still recognise that it's just basic self-gratification by another method. Worst of all, it's not even as though there weren't other markers that this could have happened since 2016 that might have spurred them into retrospective action. The French election of 2017 was attacked in a similar manner, using a huge dumping of misinformation into the internet as one prong of attack and actively hacking candidates as another. President Macron's En Marche party were the victim of a 9-gigabyte email dump done, according to the NSA and French intelligence services, by Russian state-backed hackers. Yet, once again, in contrast to the UK, the French took active involvement in both protecting their own democratic process going forward and the minimisation of the damage done by the attacks already carried out. The tables have very much turned when the British so willingly wave the white flag whilst Paris stands tall against foreign interference. Then, let's not forget the Russian state-sanctioned murder of 2 of their citizens on UK soil in March of 2018, Sergei and Yulia Skripal. It took the UK government a mere 8 days from the poisoning taking place in Salisbury to the official accusation of Russia. 8 days! And the government was absolutely certain that foreign agents had conducted illicit operations in a UK city. This was backed up by no fewer than 28 other countries confirming that their intelligence services corroborated that allegation. The UK government was so certain that the Russians had carried out the attack that they expelled 150 Russian diplomats, even when the accused agents themselves provided this totally legitimate reason for them being in Salisbury.
Друзья нам давно уже советовали посетить этот прекрасный город.
Солсбери.
Да.
Прекрасный город.
Да.
Он это туристический город. Там есть знаменитый собор, Солсберийский собор. Он знаменит не только во всей Европе, он знаменит, я так думаю, даже во всем мире. Он знаменит своим шпилем 123-метровым, он знаменит своими часами, самыми первыми часами, которые были изобретены в мире, которые до сих пор идут.
Ah yes, convincing. Not in the least bit read straight from Wikipedia. How could we possibly doubt them? Send all those diplomats back straight away. All is forgiven. No. Despite all of these clear warning signs over the last 4 years, the UK government still resolutely refused to ensure that the intelligence services investigate other potential involvements by Russia. Now that is either dangerously naive or deliberately negligent, and I am not convinced that either of those are reassuring traits in elected officials. When I'm next asked to vote for a potential leader of the nation in these difficult times, I'm not going to immediately think of something comparable, like, why not Zoidberg? So how then did the government try to sweep this shambles under the rug so comprehensively? Well, as I said at the top of the show, it was initially buried by Prime Minister Johnson himself as a solo decision before the general election and was withheld from the public scrutiny until this week. But the release of it this week was scheduled to coincide with a news cycle the government clearly hoped would trump the report. Chancellor Rishi Sunak finally announcing the supposed reward for all of those in the public sector who had toiled so endlessly during the coronavirus lockdown. On the same day as the report was released, Mr Sunak said, "These past months have underlined what we always knew, that our public sector workers make a vital contribution to our country and that we can rely on them when we need them. It is right, therefore, that we follow the recommendations of the independent pay bodies with this set of real term pay rises." That's right, folks. They always knew that public sector workers were the backbone of society, and this announcement has absolutely nothing to do with a wild, desperate attempt to get you to look the other way whilst it is revealed that the Conservative Party were grossly negligent in protecting the country. It is clearly because public sector workers can be relied upon that the Tories gave them a pay freeze for 7 years, effectively resulting in dramatic real-term reductions in the value of their salary. That'll also be why the government gave an insulting pay rise to nurses 2 years ago that their union has since admitted they were wrong to recommend accepting, and as a result of nurses accepting said increase, shan't be including them in this latest round of pay rises, even though I think we can all agree that nurses have clearly earned it over the last 6 months. That'll also be why this round of pay increases for teachers, Rishi Sunak had originally stated would be at 5.5%, will actually be at just over 2.5% for over 2/3 of teachers, and as a result still leaves them and every other public sector worker at a dramatic net pay loss versus 2010, all because ministers have always known that the public sector made vital contributions. Talk about failing to read the room. I mean, That'd be like Boris ignoring a question on national security at Prime Minister's Question Time and then accusing the man who personally brought charges against Russia on behalf of Alexander Litvinenko's widow of failing to condemn the Novichok poisonings so as to play to his crowing backbenchers. Totally mad. What? He did what?
Well, Mr. Speaker, actually, when I was Foreign Secretary, for the period that I've been in office, we've been taking the strongest possible action against Russian wrongdoing, orchestrating, I seem to remember, the expulsion of 130 Russian diplomats, 153 Russian diplomats around the world, while the right honourable gentleman opposite sat on his hands and said nothing, while the Labour Party parroted the line of the Kremlin when people in this country were poisoned at the orders of Vladimir Putin.
Mr. Speaker, I was absolutely clear in condemning what happened in Salisbury, not least because I was involved in bringing proceedings against Russia on behalf of the Litvinenko family. That is why I was so strong about it. And Mr. Speaker, I spent 5 years as Director of Public Prosecutions working on live operations with the security and intelligence services, so I'm not going to take lectures from the Prime Minister about national security.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Look, this is all clearly unforgivable, but it's actually overshadowed by something that the government has done in the past before their election campaign, when it seems they were busy lying about Jeremy Corbyn's interpretation of the potential US trade deal. You might recall the election took place on the 12th of December in the run-up to Christmas, and it's possible that, like me, you are fond of the occasional Christmas film. It's also possible one of your favourite Christmas films is Love Actually, and that you were therefore utterly enraged when the Tories ripped off that delightful movie, so full of joy and whimsy, to bring us Boris stood on someone's steps with a selection of signs just to present the terrible campaign social media tool, #VoteConservativeActually. If then you wish to use that same social media to express your displeasure and want something more representative of how bad things actually are, then Tory shambles hashtag, or more socially acceptable than the #Tory clusterfuck, both genuine and previously trending on Twitter by the way, then may I present you with the perfect tool as part of tonight's closing thoughts. Next time you remain unsurprised by the constant failings. Next time another enormous political scandal totally fails to shock you. Next time the government lies to you and nothing happens to them, not even being paraded through Parliament on their hands and knees, you can express your disdain at the catastrophic failings of the Conservative Party very easily. #Catastory. I look forward to seeing what you tag with it. Good night.